Hello and welcome to the first BetaKit Podcast episode of 2024 in our brand new studio. Rob couldn't be here this week. He is trapped in the prison of his own New Year's resolutions. So instead, to kick off 2024, we've got BetaKit reporter Josh Scott, which I think is pretty important because this week we're going to play a little game. We're going to ask the big tech questions of 2024. Let's dig in. Josh, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. Happy to be here again.
I appreciate you coming on what was a long notice period that you had to be able to do this. I appreciate that we're also in this new studio setup, sitting across from each other in a long table because it feels like we're going to play a game of Battleship. And I think, it's the beginning of the year. Everyone's still, they're either doing dry January or regretting like certain choices, or maybe like they were sick over the holidays. We're just going to ease people into 2024 by asking very, very difficult tech questions. We're not going to try to answer them. That's not the podcast for that kind of thing. But I thought we would play a little bit of a game, and we'll just go back and forth. I got a list of tech questions that I'm going to be wondering about this year. I'm assuming you also have the same. And then we'll just try to fire them back and forth at each other until one of us quits. May the best man win.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Because you're not often on the podcast unless something incredibly dramatic has happened surrounding your reporting, do you want to have the honor of going first?
Sure. Happy to kick this off and yeah, shoot from the hip on short notice here.
This is some reverse putting it in. This is where the reverse psychology comes in. We're trying to undermine each other. I wanted to give you the first question to see if you'd break psychologically, but now I'm super worried that you're going to take one of my better questions. But go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess honestly, based on a lot of our coverage recently, one of my big questions is how many more Canadian tech CEOs will we see depart this year?
God damn it. Okay. Next time when we do this for real, I won't let you go first. Fuck. Okay. Talk to people why you're asking this question.
We've written a lot of stories recently about longstanding Canadian tech CEOs departing. There's obviously Tulip, Untether AI, Alida, Safe Software yesterday, Top Hat, which we broke earlier this week, Cinchi. There's even an in-house CEO departure that happened relatively recently.
What? Oh yeah, that's right. I'm no longer the CEO of BetaKit. Yeah, I'm happy to be included in this illustrious group. Still here, still kicking, not going anywhere. Anybody who asked me that question when we made the announcement. But you're also forgetting just before the end of the year as well. This might have been bigger news than BetaKit's news. I won't judge or say, but Stuart Lombard from Ecobee.
Right, Ecobee relatively recently as well.
Yeah. So I guess, are you expecting more to come in rapid succession? Do we want to maybe try to identify why this is happening? What's prompting you to be paying attention to this, other than the fact that it seems like CEOs are dropping like flies? Maybe walk us through the Top Hat circumstance, because that's we did Stuart Lombard before the end of the year. We're actually looking to book him as a podcast guest, so stay tuned for that. That was we also broke that story, but it was much more of a controlled announcement. Successor was set in place. Everybody was ready to say nice things about Stuart, and I think his 16-year run at the company. Describe for everyone what the Top Hat circumstance is as of recording and release Friday morning.
Right. Top Hat was, I guess, certainly a little different from Ecobee in that we broke the news. Top Hat's CEO handpicks Mike Siligadze's handpicked successor departed early this month, and Top Hat's currently looking for a new leader. They say they're close to naming one. But it was an interesting case where I was actually personally, I was a little surprised that they didn't just announce this publicly, and that we ended up breaking it, because Top Hat's a pretty noteworthy Canadian tech company, just quietly losing their CEO, and then also their CRO departed.
Yes, both the other companies, right?
Yeah, and apparently those were independent decisions. It's an
Well, let's talk about that, because we ran that story on Wednesday, earlier this week.
Earlier this week.
By the time you're hearing this, it was air quotes earlier this week. And at that time, I believe we had been able to confirm that the CRO already had a listed position at a new company. I think that was announced over a release shortly after. And then the day after we broke the Top Hat story, the former CEO was announced as part of his new company, which means that whenever you change your job, either finding out you're no longer in the current job or getting hired for the new position happens well in advance. So there was at least some sort of movement on this, right? Like this wasn't a early January surprise situation.
Yeah.
So given that, I was surprised that Top Hat did not really have the messaging in place to speak to go forward, even though per our reporting, they had communicated the news to employees the first week of January. But it kind of reminded me of when Slack's recent CEO jumped ship and it was announced by the new company that she was going to. And then Slack and Salesforce were kind of like, yeah, we'll get back to you in a week. And it's kind of like, you knew this was going to be announced. You think you'd have something ready? Does that make you think that some of this stuff is coming a little bit hot and heavier this year, or there's a motivation beyond individual personal choices here that might make you think that there's going to be more of these?
Yeah, I'd definitely say that. I mean, like on a really basic level, we've been through and a lot of these CEOs have been through a pandemic, a downturn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure a lot of people are probably pretty tired.
Well, some of these people, if you talk Elliot Tulip or Stuart Ecobee, they also remember the 2008 financial crisis, right? This is decade plus in for some of these people.
Yeah, and for other companies, obviously, there's also given like the current environment for a lot of companies, there's no clear end in sight. In given what's happening with IPOs, exit market maybe not being what people necessarily hoped it could be. I think I wouldn't be surprised if we see more decide, hey, I've done my work. I'm tired. I want to do something else. Yep. Obviously, in some cases, like in Safe, which we wrote about yesterday, one of their co-CEOs wanted to cash out to focus on other things, family, philanthropy. I'm sure in some cases, given the environment, as I mentioned earlier, like some companies maybe haven't been seeing the results they wanted. And maybe they need to make some sort of strategy shift, and maybe that their current CEO isn't the person for that shift.
Yeah, or going back to the personal side, there's also, it's completely expected for these decisions to be happening at the end of one year and the beginning of a new one, when you have that time to reflect and decide, whether or not you're the right person for the job. Do you still want to be doing the job? Are there other interests? There's been a lot of, BetaKit experienced some turnover in 2023. There's a lot of post-pandemic people just deciding to change their course of life and their interest. I think we'll talk a little bit more when that comes at an institutional level. Even seeing some institutions just deciding to say, "Hey, we're not moving forward with that." But yeah, I think the answer to your question, Josh, is yes. We're going to see a couple more significant CEO departures in 2024. So good one. You hit my battleship. Let me see if I can. What am I going to do here? I got a couple choices. I made the battleship reference, but this is a little bit more like Pokemon. Like what Pokemon am I choosing to combat your question here? Okay, here's a good one, kind of in line. Are we going to see a tech IPO in 2024? If we go back to the boom times of Canadian tech IPOs, 2021, we were seeing like sometime around 15 to 20 sizable technology companies going public in Canada. The result of that were that very few of them made money. And since then, we've actually seen some of them go private. I think we've seen more publicly traded companies that went public in the last 5 years go private than successful IPOs. So we've got Broadband TV, we've got Q4, we've got MindBeacon, we've got Magnet. Now that was a very different circumstance. I think there was like a bit of a bidding war to grab those shares and be taken private, and there was actually even a bit of a shareholder vote there. But I know the Globe and Mail, we were talking about this in an editorial meeting recently, kind of had prognosticated that we're going to see a return of IPOs this year in the Canadian market, and that tech was going to maybe drive that a bit. I'm really surprised by that. I do not think that we are going to see very many significant tech IPOs this year, because other than that weird immediate post-COVID period, we've never really seen them. Like, I could count in the 20 years that I've been working in tech, prior to that, like the number of significant IPOs on one hand. Like, we just do not average out successful tech exits in that fashion, and there are many more companies that never made it to that point that are more kind of like, I don't know if zombie companies would be insulting or apt, depending upon who you're talking to, but there are more companies of a certain vintage that never passed that threshold. I'm thinking like maybe the most obvious one being Hootsuite, that never made it out the way its peers or colleagues did, and probably will never have the opportunity to do so again. So, Josh, will we see a tech IPO in 2024?
Great question. I think it's safe to say we will certainly see tech IPOs in general. As far as whether we will see a Canadian tech IPO, I wouldn't be surprised if we see at least one or a few Canadian tech IPOs towards the end of the year.
Josh, my sweet summer child.
I wouldn't be too surprised by that, but I think it's at least, there are a few things. I think it's safe to say that we're not going to see anything like what we saw in, what would it have been, 2020, 2021, in terms of that flood of Canadian tech IPOs. We're not going to see it. I think it's safe to say we're not going to see anything like that anytime soon. We're not returning to a zero interest rate environment anytime soon.
RIP everyone's mortgages.
It's interesting though. Like, I just feel like there's just something's got to give. Like, conditions are improving, and there are just so many late stage companies that want liquidity in some form. And obviously some of those companies are trying to get their employees and their founders liquidity through other means. But I feel like there's just such a huge backlog that I wouldn't be surprised if a couple finally slip through the cracks.
Let's dig into this, because I agree something's got to give, but the return to normalcy, the non-2021 of it that we're going to see, isn't a couple every year. It's going to go back to, oh my God, Shopify IPO'd. That's amazing. We haven't seen that in years. It is not common practice for cohorts of Canadian tech companies to go public. And we shouldn't see the backlog or the lineup as a forcing function to exit in this fashion, because like this type of exit requires escape velocity. It requires momentum and trajectory to IPO. There are other exits that are much more path of least resistance. So if we're talking about M&A, we're seeing more public companies go private than we're seeing IPO. I think what's going to give would be towards that, unless just the circumstances of what's happening at these companies in terms of their revenue generation and in the public markets themselves changes. Because I don't think being not 2021 crazy means that we're necessarily primed and in a good position in 2024 for that to be a viable strategy.
Right. Let me also maybe reframe something. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a couple of Canadian tech IPOs. I'm not necessarily saying that either of those IPOs, if they do come, will necessarily be successful. I just I think I wouldn't be surprised.
Someone's just going to try it. Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if we see some companies go public. I mean, I certainly hope if any do, they are successful, but it's still a tough time. Like, conditions certainly aren't ideal. While they're improving, they certainly aren't ideal. So,
okay.
Yeah, that's what I'd say on that.
Okay. So we're talking about exits in all shapes and sizes, from CEOs to companies themselves. What do you got next, man? How are you going to counter my Raichu?
Let's maybe go here. What question I certainly don't know the answer to. What will happen to SDTC, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, this year?
Why should our listeners and our viewers care about SDTC? Give the TLDR of the circumstance of this organization that nobody seemed to care about until everyone was leaving and some other things happened.
Yeah, I would say, I'm certainly say people in the clean tech space cared about it.
Yes, beyond the clean tech founders and their investors who were freaking the fuck out when we were writing about this in late October, early November. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of tech publications like us and general news publications, SDTC has dominated the news cycle since
Was it late September even, right? Early October?
since mid to late last year.
I feel like I was just flying back from Michigan when we were working on that story.
Yeah. So what I would say,
like anyone, one of our listeners was like, "Oh yeah, Douglas was in Michigan in late fall for a family wedding," but I believe it was around that time.
Yeah, I think you're right. And basically, SDTC is a federal clean tech investment agency, funds clean tech projects,
Picking those winners.
Of particularly important. Yeah, it's particularly important for early stage clean tech projects, and basically, they're as BetaKit reported, and as many other publications reported, there were some questions regarding conflict of interest in terms of how SDTC was deploying money and which companies it was deploying them to.
A little bit more friends of friends than funds of funds.
That was reporting indicates that, and there was obviously a government study into this.
Yeah, I think I said said that as well. I think their reporting indicated.
And so there was an independent study into this. Following the release of that study, I said basically halted any new funding from SDTC towards new clean tech projects, and asked them to take a bunch of steps basically to address the perceived issues there. And so SDTC, the expectation was that SDTC would, from the federal government, would implement these recommendations by the end of last year. I'm not 100% sure whether they have yet.
Well, Josh, who would be there to implement the recommendations? You're bearing the lead here.
Another very great question. Basically, since all that's happened, their CEO and chair of their board of directors have both left. Some board members have also departed.
Notably, like Jill Earthy, be familiar to the tech ecosystem, particularly in province of BC. Number of people have departed.
Yeah. CEO Leah Lawrence and chair Annette Verschuren. And then I think another board member as well.
Yeah.
At least.
Now we should know that some of the executives here have formally resigned, and some of the board members, according to statements from SDTC, their term was up earlier last year, and they extended their board stay to support transition. And I guess once the clock struck 2024, that was over. So there's a bit of a difference here, but maybe going back, when you were talking to clean tech folks in, let's say, late September, early October, they were freaking out about even the pause of funding commitments being deployed until end of December, particularly given the market. I think the need for clean tech solutions, because the world's on fire, but mostly due to the capital situation in Canada at the time, closing out the year. What are they going to do now, man?
It's a great question. I certainly don't know the answer to. I mean, as I think you mentioned earlier, the big question is if indeed they still do have to, or in the process of implementing these recommendations. I guess the question is who is implementing them, and it's certainly safe to say that if this organization continues, there's going to be new leadership because their CEO, their chair is left. They got
and possibly a modified mandate if the government decides that because you were saying that business publications like ours have been covering this pretty closely. I would say that the coverage of it has been more of the political bent because of the connection to the federal government, more so than the actual forcing function of what the program is for. Coverage of the resignations and the hearings and the testifying has been a little bit more significant than the downstream impact on what the organization was for. I wonder if this is just too toxic an asset to maybe continue in the fashion that it had been to date.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I think so. CBCs at any time CBCs really come in terms of reporting on this because it's a political story, and as we all know, our federal government is certainly not at its most popular right now. So in terms of
sorry, I almost choked on my coffee now.
In terms of this scandal and sort of in terms of this happening right now, it's not the best look for them. So I guess another question might be like whether there's some reform, like some more significant reformatting of SDTC, or even just like a rebranding if it does continue, because like
rebrand.
Well, like
Okay.
the Nomad visa.
Let
Which
me
we might get to later.
no. You're not no. Let me take your reform statement, and I'm going to turn that into my next question. And this is where the Pokemon metaphor really holds, because I'm gonna get the Squirtle out there with the Raichu, and you've got a combo situation going on. Because we know that Josh is weak against water. Will this government fall before it makes any significant contribution to the innovation economy? We have talked for quite a bit on this podcast last year about our low trust battery with this current federal government and their capacity to meet their own commitments towards the innovation economy. Just before the end of the year, literally, I think on the last working Friday for most people, it was a take out the trash communications dump by the federal government, noting that they were punting the merger of IRAP into the Canada Innovation Corporation until some possibly 2026 or 2027, which would be after the next election, as they look to undergo changes to the CIC. This organization that's been announced, been in the works for quite some time, initially started as, was proposed as a Canadian DARPA, and then was reformed. We spoke to Dan Bresnitz on this podcast about the new vision for that and how difficult it was going to be to find a leader for that. They still haven't found a leader for it. That's been punted. We have been following some very interesting LinkedIn threads this week about people just posing the question, hey, what happened to that digital nomad tech talent visa program that was announced on the main stage of Collision last year that it was a big to-do? Well, that announcement was made by an immigration minister, Sean Fraser, no longer the immigration minister. I guess there is a portal for digital nomads to sign up for this visa, but it's just like the normal travel visa.
Visitor visa.
Yeah, visitor visa. We have gone head over heels, over indexed in our coverage of the delays related to open banking. Now, with this drop, I think the Fed's also promised that a commitment to have some sort of legislation in place by next year's budget to actually putting open banking as a requirement to law, which most people in the open banking space, the financial services space, applauded. But then it's like, well, they're just committing to next year do the thing that we could already be doing based upon the past commitments. And then it punts the timeline out 1 year again to even get started. So they've just like recommitted to starting a timeline. But hey, it looks like we're going to get that shred review this quarter. So that's something. The Master of Engineering, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship program at Toronto Metropolitan University is for the next generation of innovators that want to make an impact. Embark on a transformative journey, gaining hands-on entrepreneurship training in the heart of Toronto, the Six. This is a 16-month master's program delivered by industry experts in the tech space, and it offers students access to tools, funding, and incubation space to bring their innovations to life. Learn how you can gain cross-transferable skills needed to build your own startup, run an innovation team, or create meaningful societal impact. Admissions are open now. Visit torontomu.ca/MEIE to learn more and let them know that BetaKit sent you. Again, Josh, I'll ask you, I probably missed a couple of things here. I'm not sure I've missed anything major, significant that this government has done. And when I say this government, I mean from the last election to now, not the continuous liberal oversight, right? We're just about to see the CEBA loan payment period be up. There were some major COVID things that have happened. We don't need to talk about super clusters at all. That
clusters now.
Just clusters now. They've been downgraded. I won't have you politically prognosticate if the government's going to fall. Maybe let me flip and say, do you think there's going to be actually any significant contributions from this federal government this year?
I'm glad you asked that question instead, because I certainly don't want to predict whether our government will fall.
It's a different show. That's the Josh Scott Drive Time show, Fridays at 5 p.m.
Yeah,
Check your local listings.
So first, I'll just pose just to make this more difficult for you, I'll pose my related question, which was whether we will see.
You're just countering questions with questions now. This game has devolved into madness.
Whether we will see, actually, I mean, I don't have any off the top of my head, but I know there have been a bunch that we haven't heard about in a while.
These are just the ones that we care about. There's a whole portfolio of promises that have not come to fruition.
Yeah, given what we've seen, I guess one of my questions is whether we will see Canada's federal government scrap or punt any other innovation-related commitments in addition to the ones they've already moved back or postponed. In terms of this year, I personally wouldn't, based on what I know, I wouldn't predict any more big innovation related commitments from this federal government.
Yeah.
Like there's, as I mentioned earlier, like they're certainly not at their most popular. And the focus really seems to be on affordability, housing. Who knows if any of those efforts will really address.
Let's dig into that
issue,
because there's one, like, it's not like they can't do anything because they're not popular, and I don't even really care about the popularity component. Only to say, I think part of the issue and the reason why our trust battery is low is all of these are not necessarily things that the ecosystem has been asking for. These are commitments that this government has made that then the ecosystem is expecting them to deliver on. And you would expect a government that was down bad in terms of continued existence would be looking to, if not rush through, force through its promises or commitments to get things done before their time would be up. And we've seen little to any energy or motivation to do what they've just committed to. So I don't know if it's like, it'll be difficult for them to get anything done because they're not popular. The follow-up question to your question is like, why do they not seem to feel any pressure to implement the things that they have promised?
Right. No, that's a fair point. Those aren't necessarily linked. The connection I'd make is that, like, generally the focus right now is a little less on, given the state of the economy and what we're seeing going on. It seems like its focus is a little less on economic growth and more on, like, addressing Canadians' affordability concerns.
Urgent needs that have also been ignored for several years.
You could say that. And
at the municipal, provincial, and federal level, I'm not going to hang this on any.
Yeah, and in terms of economic growth, like, we obviously have seen, like, the real focus now is new commitments and investments in supporting Canada's transition to EVs and sort of the tech and infrastructure for that. So I don't expect at least any more new innovation commitments, like, given sort of the general focus. I guess you could maybe also say, like, governments generally are more inclined to focus on newer things and shinier newer things.
What's the new shiny thing? That's a great question. And I think maybe as a prompt for us to have Ben Bergen from CCI on, probably early this year, certainly before we get into budget territory, and we'll just let him prognosticate.
Yeah, but yeah, it's certainly unfortunate that we've seen so many promises sort of fall by the wayside and be put on the back burner. And I certainly hope that open banking isn't one of them.
To have some positivity here, we did get some competition reform for our competition commissioner. Free Matt Boswell, #FreeBoswell is live and in play. So that is significant. But, we're also going to be recording a podcast next week about why all the telcos are upping everyone's phone bill this year in Canada. So it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Did we actually get competition reform, or did we get the promise that changes will be made in the future?
Josh, just go to your next question, man. I was trying to leave it on a positive. Okay, what's your next question?
Oh, you're counting my last one as my question for you? All right. Well, I mean, I'll go into this because I know you have a bit more context on hand about this. But I guess another related question in the wake of, I guess, the biggest name being OpenView, the OpenView shutdown.
Damn I shouldn't have shared my list with you before we recorded. Son of a bitch.
Will we see any Canadian VCs shut down this year? And I know OpenView's not alone. OpenView's one of the biggest names recently, but there have certainly been a few others. And as I personally know, like, a lot of VCs are struggling to raise funds at all. A lot of Canadian VCs are struggling to raise funds. A lot of them are struggling to hit the targets they set out previously. it's taking longer.
I think they're struggling to deploy capital as well.
That's also a consideration. Douglas, will we see any Canadian VCs shut down?
Well, if you blinked and missed OpenView just ethering itself suddenly towards the end of last year, a real bookend to SVB kicking off the beginning of last year. I would recommend you check out our episode with Matt Roberts of Command Capital, where we really dug into that, and he predicted that we will definitely see it in Canada. Since OpenView, just the beginning of this year, we've already seen a couple other U.S. funds announce that they were going to shut down. Fintech focused Vetimer Capital has shut down its hedge fund, and then the early stage hard tech firm Countdown Capital is also shutting down. There are probably going to be more. I think maybe the interesting thing I would speak to here, and I want to draw a distinction between ecosystems. As sudden and surprising as it is to see shutdowns at the VC level, institutional level, happening, that market, because of the amount of capital in it and the amount of firms in it, and I would say more of a culture of shutting down and sending back the money, I think is much more amenable to that here. Meanwhile, what have we been talking about this whole way? How many of our tech questions are related to some government program, government support? Like we could invoke the VCCI here, Vicky, as a component of this in terms of Canadian emerging VCs struggles to close funds, deploy capital, much smaller LP base, all of those things. I think there are already Canadian firms that in a US context would have shut down that are still hanging on because we are more expectant of some sort of federal or provincial support when it comes to from an LP perspective. But I would say, Matt Roberts says that he expects firms to go under or go zombie like OpenView. And that's not including some of the firms that we've already covered at BetaKit that are effectively that haven't been able to raise new funds, such as Real Ventures. And he has a perspective on the inside for not only what CMD is trying to do themselves, raise a fund, but what all of his counterparts are doing because the LP base is so small. And if the people on the inside are saying expect this to happen, you should expect that to happen. I should also note that one of the most senior VPs at BDC related to venture investments just left their job and will become the CEO of Mars around, I think, the end of March. Now, again, personal decision, possibly new opportunity. Young-woo has stepped down his tenure at Mars, but is it more interesting that that person is leaving or that they're joining the new organization? That's all I'll say. But to answer your question, Josh, I believe that we will see a zombie Canadian VC fund this year, net new.
Yeah, no, that makes sense in terms of I think even certainly relative to the US. I mean, I'd have to do take some analysis to see relative to our population, but we haven't seen many high profile VC firm shutdowns. In my time reporting at BetaKit.
Because the high profile VC firms that we count in Canada are a pittance compared to US counterparts. And I don't in any way mean that to diminish the people working in Canada, but just relative to size and scale and scope. Like the most active firms that we see here have orders of magnitude less capital to deploy. And we talked about this in the podcast with Matt Roberts. Most of our more active and prominent firms in Canada are still emerging firms. They've only maybe had one or two or three funds still. You would think that would leave these firms a little bit more vulnerable compared to the US. But again, we just don't have that culture of shutting things down, sending back the money, and starting the new thing. We are waiting for SDTC to come back. That's just the culture. We're waiting for VCCI to deploy funds. So in some ways it makes it harder, but
right. Where I was gonna go was I think just culturally, given how we approach things, like I'd expect to see more zombie funds that we may or may not even report on or hear about.
Just the quiet shutdowns.
Yeah, the funds that haven't raised new funds in a
Yep.
while that maybe quietly tried to and then weren't able to.
And we're aware of that at a company level. There's a whole backlog of companies that we could be writing about that we're aware of and we're still evaluating. Is this does their end of life circumstance merit some coverage, or I don't want to attribute this. I don't know what was going down at Top Hat. Obviously, like they had removed their CEO and their CRO from the website, and like the other companies they were joining were prepping announcements. Maybe they just thought it's the beginning of the year, no one's paying attention, we can slow roll this, and BetaKit said check raise. But I think it's also part of our culture to like quietly let something die in the corner rather than have a clean break and rip off the Band-Aid. Speaking of ripping off the Band-Aid, Josh, is this the last year we'll see Collision in Canada? Note, I didn't say Toronto. I said Canada. Per all of our reporting last year, you absolutely crushed the Collision tech event beat, and I think you should win an award this year for it. But I think some of your reporting indicated that Collision had re-signed a 1-year agreement for this year in the city of Toronto. We've also noted that there is basically an open bidding process with several other locations around the world to house Collision potentially after next year. And as we've noted in our reporting, City of Toronto still broke. They're proposing a modest property tax increase that people are still freaking out about. Seems like we're cutting services left and right and trading our waterfront away for reasons I don't understand. So the circumstances that might lead Collision to not be in Toronto anymore continue. Do you think we'll see Collision in Canada after this year?
Great question. I guess it's a requirement for me going forward every time I'm on here. In the meantime, to discuss Collision in some shape or form.
Yeah, it's your secret scar. I guess the follow-up question to this is like, will the new CEO of Collision call you a scumbag this year, related to your reporting?
I think it's safe to predict that will not happen.
I don't think it's safe to predict that. Why would you think it's safe to predict that?
Well, I think
it's a straight 50-50 coin flip, and coming from like the historicals, I would say it's more likely than not that some executive at Collision calls you a scumbag this year.
I mean,
that's just probability, son.
Yeah, I don't know. That's
sorry, man.
That was just such a wild circumstance. I don't.
Again, we'll definitely maybe link to the reference here or on the YouTube video. I'm gonna just raise my hand, and you'll see the interview that I did with the former CEO of Collision to get some context for what we're talking about. Yeah. But Josh, not being a scumbag reporter and being deeply sourced in what's going on related to because again, hey, tech events don't happen in Canada without some sort of government support or pitch, right? Especially for ones of this size, where we're talking about like 20 to 30,000 people coming in. I want to get back to your reporting. What are you thinking? If take the probability for inside Canada or outside Canada in 2025, what are you putting your bet on?
It's tough to say at this point. Like, I think it's unlikely that it will be returning to Toronto beyond this year. It's
I didn't say okay. So you're okay. So you're starting with Toronto, and
it's possible that it ends up in Vancouver. I know that there's still desire among groups or from groups in Vancouver to bring it there.
Nothing in Calgary. We can't get a Stampede co-branding thing going on. They got a lot of flat space. They can.
That
you
would
get
be
a giant tent and then put everyone in that tent.
It's tough to say. Like I mean, I'm sure I'll be writing more about it this year.
I'm sure you will be. As your editor, I think I will.
I'm sure I'll be assigned to read more about it this year. So you'll read about what's actually happening in BetaKit, but it's tough to say. Like it could stay in Canada. It could leave. A lot of things still need to happen for it to stay. I don't know the current status of those efforts. I just know there's still desire on the part of Vancouver and it'll be here at
Stated
least next
desire.
year. It's interesting that
Shout out Aaron Anangia, the BetaKit freelance contributor who was able to get the mayor of Vancouver indicating some things, both in context and subtext.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think like it's safe to say that like attitudes towards collision have changed a little bit over in recent months.
Okay, we got to wrap this up. We're not. That's not part of this conversation. Everyone knows what we're talking about.
So Let's basically, that might also play a role in whether it returns or not. Okay, so that's what That's all I want to wade into at this point.
Okay. Josh, I think I got you on the ropes in this game, so I'm gonna give you the final question here to see if you can stump me. I think I have your king in check. Are you gonna get out of it? Can you counter check me? Like what's going on? Drop your biggest, baddest question here to close this off. Because everything else I have is more about like, what about Twitter and stuff like that listeners of this podcast hear every week. So I don't want to. Basically, I've got nothing left. I've run out of all my good stuff. So hit me with your last best question, and we'll close this thing off, and then I guess go into 2024 finding out the answers to these questions.
My last best question. I've just got.
You got dregs too?
I've got dregs too. I mean, unless we want to go like beyond tech, because what do you have still?
John, I'm interested in what you have there that's beyond tech. Okay, I've got a couple rapid fire. Let's just do rapid answer, like tweet level. Will X make it to the end of the year? We already know that Twitter's dead. What about X?
I think X will make it to the end of the year. What it'll look like, who knows?
Will Apple's Vision Pro move forward the AR VR market at all, or is it going to be basically the what was it called, the Virtual Boy of the 21st century?
I mean, I'm no expert on this specific subject, but like I think it's safe to I would expect Apple to at least move it forward a bit. Apple has a pretty good track record as far as hardware.
I think they're going to sell all the units that they produce this year. I don't know if that number will increase. I did see a clip from is it Palmer Luckey? Is the former founder of what has become basically Facebook's Meta. What's the
Oculus?
Yeah, the Oculus. Yeah.
He's with Anduril now, I think.
Yes, founder of Oculus, which was acquired by Meta. I saw a clip of him basically saying that Apple's taking the right approach, where they have to make the most expensive, highest quality version right now to drag people towards the future, so that the price will come down. And basically, whether it was $3,500, $5,000, or $2,000, people are going to buy that version, and then it'll slowly become cheaper and easier. I get that. I'm still just wondering whether or not AR or VR, the promise actually meters out to the practice, or if anyone's like functional interest in it, which will lead me to my next question. Is this the year that AI becomes de facto or verboten? There's been a lot of conversation about AI. We've been covering the hell out of it. I think we did like 5 of our first 8 episodes last year on this podcast were about AI. But for all that conversation, moms ain't using it. It hasn't actually been implemented to the level where it's reaching people's lives in the mainstream every day. And I've been seeing a bunch of complaints of people who are heavy like ChatGPT 4 users on what it will actually no longer do versus previous conversations about what it could do. And then we haven't even talked about the New York Times lawsuit and like the copyright battle that is impending. Is this the year that AI becomes part of the mainstream, or falls into the trough of despair?
Great question. I think it'll like adoption will continue to grow. Like at least the way I've been thinking about this is like obviously there's skill involved in prompting and phrasing questions to get the answers you want, and phrasing prompts to get the exact results you want. But the barrier to entry, at least with AI, in terms of just picking up ChatGPT and using it in some way, I can't get
my head around the when people are just like, oh yeah, you just got to use this node, and you need to have it at 4 Garfunkels rather than 5. And then if the blood moon is available, you can get really great generative AI images. And I'm just like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to jump into this world. I made a funny generative AI photo for Rob and I, our tech predictions episode, and with a little bit of holiday nog in my system. It was great fun. And then I never want to do it again. And also, I couldn't for the life of me make a photo of the two of us that looked anything like us, or not generic white male podcast bro. Not that I'm really, differing too much from that, but there's no usability for the average person with anything generative AI right now.
Yeah, it's I mean, I sort of agree with that. I'd say it's a lot of it's dependent on, it's such a new thing probably for particularly like older, less tech savvy generations, that like a lot of like adoption will depend on like whether, say, you teach your mom or dad how to use this. So I don't know. I think probably we'll see adoption continue to grow. I don't know if it'll become like as mainstream as some people expect, but
well, and there's been some writing about this, but if Apple starts putting large language models on a chip in an iPhone and it's in everyone's hands, that could actually be something completely different. I just don't know if we'll see it by the end of this year. All right, Josh, do you have any question to counter me with, or have I just hit you with a flurry of blows such that I can declare myself the winner of this little game that we invented 20 minutes before we started podcasting?
Certainly not going to let you get in the last question. I'm going to take this beyond tech. Okay. How are you feeling right now about these new look Toronto Raptors?
Oh, God. Oh, Josh. Oh, God. You son of a bitch. This is like that scene in Zoolander where you like are able to rip off your underwear while still wearing pants, and there's nothing that I can do to combat it. That was the weirdest reference in the world. I'm definitely dating myself. I'm going to stick with it because you've definitely hit me right in my heart's feels. I will say this. I was so out on the team this year that I proactively made bets with dumb individuals who listen to this podcast so they know that I'm referring to them about the win total of this year's Raptors. Since the trade, I have watched every game other than the Clipper game just because I'm just too old to stay up that late, and I did it for the Laker game, and I was like a wreck the next day. I have been more impressed with this team in their losses than their wins, and their wins have been solid. I'm feeling really good. We should re-sign Pascal and next year make a run. I'm back, baby. We're so back. It's 2024. The BetaKit Podcast is back. If you have questions for us or questions about tech this year, send them in. And on next week's episode or a future AMA episode, once we can get Rob back out of his New Year's resolution dungeon that he put himself in, we'll read them live on the podcast. Maybe we'll even try to answer them. Not likely. You can send them to podcast@betakit.com and send us anything else. What do you want to see this year? Who do you want us to be talking to? What do you think of the new studio? Should we allow Josh back? Must I continue to assign him collision-related stories? The answer is yes. Regardless, we want to hear from you. Really looking forward to this year. Really excited about our new space. And we got some guests coming up that you're going to dig. So stay tuned. Until then, Josh, I can't believe you beat me at a game that I created. Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me.